Welcome to Destination Marriage, a podcast about successfully navigating the winding roads of marriage. Whether you're newlyweds, engaged, looking to get married, or have been married for years, we want to share with you how we have navigated those winding roads over the past 19 years in our marriage.
Join us on this journey as we talk about real-life experiences in a marriage and what we have learned along the way. We discuss love, travel, fitness, raising kids, friendships, and much more, all from the perspective of our lives together.
Happiness, love, grace, passion are some of the things we all strive for in a marriage, and we invite you to take this journey with us.
Welcome to Destination Marriage.
Welcome to episode 42 of Destination Marriage. I'm Jackie.
And I'm Tommy.
And we are thrilled you have joined us on this journey today.
Indeed. So for today's episode, we are titling it Finances, the Great Divide, ? Meaning, should it be? Is it? And what can you do as a married couple to manage all sorts of financial situations? Good, bad, hopefully not ugly. So what we want to kind of focus on is some very particular kind of issues that a lot of couples face in marriage. Talk a little bit about how can you get off on a good foot if you're just getting married? And then how do you manage like very specific situations? So the reason we thought this episode would be really kind of helpful is because of the impact finances has on marriage. Right. And so I looked up a few stats and I'd always heard that after infidelity, that financial issues are the number one leading cause of divorce. What do you think about that? Does that make sense?
You know what? I had actually, I remember, I think we had discussed that a long time ago as far as like the leading cause. And in the beginning, I thought, really? I don't know.
Right?
Like years ago, I felt like that just seems odd to me.
Because you think of the horrible things, right? Like infidelity. That's like a no-brainer. Yeah,
or just, I don't know, spousal abuse. I
right.
think of
like
other things that are
things.
kind of a little bit more of a deal breaker than, we're a little tight this month.
Yeah.
Gotta go. I don't know. But now that we've been married for such a long time, and obviously we've gone through the kind of ups and downs of, finance, especially because we have a lot of variables with our income.
Right.
I could see that if you're not on solid ground, how that could potentially cause a shakeup that there's no coming back from.
Yeah. So one study by TD Ameritrade found that 41% of divorced Gen Xers and 29% of boomers say they ended their marriage due to disagreements about money. Another study in the Journal of Family Relationships states, and this is about 4,500 couples, states that arguing about money early on in your relationship may be the number one predictor of whether or not you end up divorced.
That's interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think to your point about, what you said about arguing, it's like, I think it leads into and grows and boils over eventually and kind of creates all sorts of other issues within a marriage that maybe aren't necessarily specifically money related.
Yeah.
Right. And so what we were kind of talking about is, okay, well, where could that go? Right. And so one of the studies that Ramsey Solutions looked at is when they did a big survey of about 1,000 different couples is kind of the downstream effect of that stress from financial situations, how it, in that kind of that crushing burden of debt, how it just leads to a lot of times a lack of communication, and then, which then leads to arguments, mistrust, all sorts of things. It's kind of this domino effect of the impact of money.
Which it could also be, once you start feeling that, like you said, maybe that crushing burden of debt, well, maybe they're not trying to be calculated and not having the conversation or hiding something, but maybe they're just avoiding it altogether because if I don't look at the mess in the corner, it's not really there.
Head in the sand, right? Well, and so that's where, let's focus on like kind of that lack of communication. And this is, I think, really important for whether you're just getting married, been married for a long time, is really recognizing that lack of communication, where that could go and where that could take the other person or take both spouses, right?
Yeah.
I think a big piece of that is that distrust that it creates. Now, lack of communication can kind of create a perceived distrust. Like there's a distrust because why are they being quiet about what aren't they telling me?
Well, where is the money going? If they're hiding money, you know, what are they doing with the money? If I'm not actually seeing where the money is going.
Yeah. Or if you ask, you know, hey, maybe one spouse kind of just manages the finances and they just are very shifty about, you know, talking through it and not showing stuff like that there could be a real issue there.
Yeah.
Or just maybe a control issue, or maybe the one spouse that manages the money is totally on the up and up. But if you're not communicating with the spouse, it leaves everybody in the dark.
I could see how it would really be a control issue.
Could be, yeah.
And maybe not initially when you first get married, but maybe eventually down the line, it could be a control issue if that person just feels like, you know, they're making those decisions and you just have to roll with it, especially if, you know, one is the contributor and the other is not financially. You know, if one's working and the other one is not, maybe they feel like, well, it's their money and they make the decisions. I don't know. I mean, there's a million ways that can go, but yeah, that can cause a lot of distrust, especially if there's zero communication.
Yeah. And then there's real distrust that's warranted, right? Because of actual money issues that one or the other spouse has committed or is committing, right? So we talked about a few things like secret spending.
Yeah. Well, I actually had worked with somebody, I think I told you this.
This is nuts.
This is a long time ago. And I was in a different industry, but I was in sales. I was working with someone else who had been married for a few years. I still very early on in the marriage, I want to say maybe 3 years married. And their spouse was looking to potentially leave them and file for divorce because she had an issue with online gambling. And I mean, like serious online gambling. Late at night would open the computer and basically just blow hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. And, you know, they're early on in their marriage, young, just starting out. And I'm sure there are multiple conversations that happened when he was asking her to stop or even get help. But she was literally gambling away their entire life. And he was working to basically support her gambling habit. I mean, it became, that's secret spending. And I mean, look at the damage, you know, and at that time, I think they had maybe a new baby to also provide for. I mean, what do you do with that? You know, it's real. It's a real issue on its face, but it's also that distrust then that is created and could be avoided. Right. Right. I mean, it's not fair for you to put your spouse or your family, if you have a family, at risk because of your poor financial decisions.
Right. I mean, and gambling now, you talk about an addiction issue too, like that. That's a lot of
I mean,
ways it could go, right?
There's a lot of things going on in that situation, but at the core
the secret spending, right? Like
the secret spending,
and or having a credit card and buying things that eventually it comes out, right? Like if you got to pay that debt, like that debt's going to be owed, right? And so now you've got, you know. What if the other spouse, it's totally under control, but the other spouse finds out about it and it just perceives, it's not a financial deal killer, but it's a trust issue.
Yeah. Actually, you know, it's just a little funny thing. I saw this, this doormat for your front door and it was like, dear Amazon, please hide packages from husbands or something.
Well, yeah.
That's just a silly, I mean, but yes, it can be to an extreme where you're taking your credit card, hitting up Louis Vuitton, buying a full set of luggage, you know, $10,000 later, your husband's like, what's going on? You know, gets the bill or, you know, 10 grand is now racked up on a credit card.
Yeah. I think it leads perfectly into our first topic of like real topic as far as what we want to talk about today.
Yeah.
And that is, how do you get off to a good start financially in your marriage as a team, most importantly, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's a few things to kind of make sure you have good communication with your fiance, let's say at the time, or even when you first get married, is really try to understand who each other is, as far as, you know, typically they say there's a saver and a spender.
Yeah.
But for us, what we found is I'm a saver and a spender on some things. You're a saver and a spender on other things.
Yeah. I don't think one of us is the saver and one of us is absolutely the spender. But I will say, just of myself, compared to where we were when we first got married, I'm definitely more of a saver now
I think
than
so.
I was coming into the marriage.
Sure.
And just because I don't know. I live and learn, I guess, learned experiences as we've grown as husband and wife. And also as I've grown in my career,
Yeah.
The importance of saving.
Well, we've
Far
learned,
outweighs.
I mean, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but we've learned some hard lessons with being on, variable income because of sales.
Right.
Right. And so that's a whole different episode, but, but I think, now that could go to extremes too with the savers. And I would agree with you, by the way, but reverse, I've probably become more of a spender and since we've been married, to the point where sometimes you're like, why did you do that?
I'll be yeah. So like, if you made a large purchase at Home Depot or something.
Right. Whereas, 15 years ago, I wouldn't even thought about it, but sometimes I'll just buy stuff. Or it's funny. I guess the point is have that conversation up front with your spouse. Right.
Yeah.
And so it'll be our soon to be spouse. It'll be really helpful in just kind of establishing sort of how your household's going to work.
Right. But
Right.
honestly, Tommy, you do know if I'm going to spend, what am I going to spend on?
Well, that's what's funny, right? So we were just talking about it. If I came home and said, babe, I just booked us on a $5,000 vacation, you'd be like, sweet, when are we leaving? But if I came home and said, I just spent $5,000 on something else, you would give me the eyebrow and you'd be like, what the hell are you doing? Why would you spend that money? And even though it's the same amount of money.
But to me, it's like, if you were to spend $5,000 at Home Depot, I would say put it back in the car. We're going
tractor.
back to the store.
Right.
But to me, a vacation, something that we'll have forever. It's a memory. Something about, an experience to me is priceless.
I agree.
You could probably say you'd spend $10,000 on a vacation and I would not flinch. I'd be like, this is going to be amazing.
And I think that's one of those, that's honestly, I think one of the things where I've sort of molded to you and appreciate about you is that like how important the experiences are, and that it's more if we have X dollars and spending it on something that's going to build family and build our experience, create a memory or memories. It definitely can be. I've definitely molded to you on that. I never viewed it that way prior.
I just view it as, think about when you're in your rocking chair and you're old, are you going to think about whatever you purchased at Home Depot for $5,000 or that amazing trip that you took to Capri? I don't know.
And we're not talking about being like, irresponsible with money. We're just saying like understanding kind of your each of yours mentality and your approach to money and agreeing on that and understanding it with each other, I think is really important. All right, babe. What about understanding what's mine, what's yours, what's ours?
So what's mine is mine and what's yours is mine.
Right. There you go. Next point.
Just
Question answered. But I think maybe the first one on this list that you need to address is separate or joint checking accounts. Right? It's a big one. Our approach has been joint since day one. Now you have your business account, right? And I had a business account because I was running all my expenses through it, and then just to keep. Well, yeah. Even though they were reimbursed, it just made it cleaner.
Well, a business account shouldn't be a joint account.
That's different, right?
That's
sure.
Different, no.
But I have visibility into your business account. It's all under one. It's all the same bank. It's just separate accounts. Our personal take is that we recommend a joint checking account. It's part of that covenant of being together as one. We're not going to argue against people that have separate checking accounts.
That they have separate checking accounts, but what works well for us is to have a joint account. We have complete transparency on our finances, where we are and where we're headed with that. And
we have complete transparency across the board with our finances. All the credit cards, all our bank account, everybody, we know our logins and everything. I think that's crucial. I really do think that's important because, I'm not going to, we think it's important, right? I know there's different opinions on it. I think at least, even if you do have separate accounts, there should be some transparency around that though. Right?
Yeah. I don't really see how, I don't know if everything was secretive. Let's say it wasn't joint. Let's say we did not have a joint account. Okay. Because there's obviously listeners that don't share a joint account.
Right.
If you're not sharing exactly where you are, bottom line, with checking your savings or even your outstanding debt, I don't really see how you would be able to financially plan for your current situation or your future with a question mark.
I think it's unwise. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what do you think about like a very rigid, one spouse pays these bills out of their account, one spouse pays for these bills each month.
I've actually heard of that a lot.
Right.
I know a lot of people that do that. I know a lot of people that, one spouse manages all of the grocery spending. So honestly, I think if maybe that's agreed upon and it's really just to manage kind of the weight that's on your shoulders versus mine, and there's no outside spending of what the agreed upon amount will be, whether it's for groceries, clothing,
Sure.
fun money. I think if you're sticking to that and there's no deceitful, behind
That's the
the
key,
scenes
right?
spend,
Is making, if it's
as long
used
as it doesn't open a door,
Right.
for one to obviously deceive the other, I think it's okay if it works well.
Yeah, if it works for your household, okay. It is what it is. I just think if I had the choice, it should be, if given those two scenarios, I would argue that a joint checking account, agreed upon budget, transparency is more valuable for the marriage long term than having separate accounts. But
Yeah.
I think the point there is to when we're talking about starting out on a good foot, is establish that up front and have communication about why. If someone wants a joint separate account, why? Is there an emotional component? Is there they learned a hard lesson from their parents, or their understand why that's the issue. Sometimes maybe, I don't know, that's the way my parents did it, or vice versa. So just have those conversations and establish that so that you can focus on all the other stuff in your marriage that you're going to need to work through too.
Yeah. I mean, and it is a little bit different, I will say, because you and I kind of came into our marriage basically, at the same point in our life, right? The same starting point. There are other couples that are coming into the marriage with one having a significant amount of financial stability. They could be further along in their career. They could have had family inheritance. There's a lot of other elements there that I could, especially if somebody came into a marriage and they were left with, a lot of financial stability because of a parent or a grandparent, what they had been left, or given, right? I could see the hesitancy there with not wanting to immediately come into a relationship, in their marriage with, let's share everything that my parents just left me. You know what I mean? Especially because if they feel like it's not truly what they worked for, or they worked for together as husband and wife. I think there's different scenarios where I would understand.
It could go all sorts of
why
routes,
it
right?
would give someone pause. But yes, for us, what works best is everything is completely transparent. We share our accounts. We also do, we check in regularly. I know we've talked about doing quarterly things that's more alongside our goals, but because we are in sales and we have been in sales basically since day one, there are huge increases, at times, and sometimes, there's dips. So, you have to check in constantly to make sure that we're still on track to meet those goals. And if we should have moments where we want to maybe, step out of that and do something else, like a large purchase. I don't know.
Which we will get to in a moment. But the last thing I think that we wanted to bring up that maybe is something that rarely gets talked about on the front end of a marriage is, as you're about to now combine two families, right, is to have an understanding of how are we going to establish our household with respect to expectations from extended family around finances, right?
Yeah.
And so we're not going to go into too much on that, but it's something that we never talked about. We just kind of learned what was happening, what expectations were or were not, or what was tradition, within our families. Now, there's big swings in what that traditions may look like. I know that there's some cultures where the parents still manage the finances for their adult children, adult married children. And if both husband and wife agree on that, okay. I mean, if that's what you guys do, that's what you guys do. But what could be bad is if you're 2 months into the marriage and all of a sudden like, why is your dad paying all our bills? Oh, I didn't tell you. He has access to my checking account. He pays all our bills every month. Or
so
vice versa.
he's managing their income,
right,
not paying their bills out of his
or
own pocket.
let's say managing their income or managing,
that's odd.
right?
Now, if your dad wanted to pay all of our bills, I'd be like, awesome, it's amazing.
But it could be
I would take no offense.
It could be an issue. right? You got to have that
be,
conversation,
that
whatever
would be
the
bizarre.
scenario is.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's more of an extreme, but I think what maybe is more likely to happen is when someone's in need. Mm-hmm. And one family, just the expectation is, you just help, you just give money, mm-hmm. and you don't even think twice about it.
Right.
Which is, I'm not arguing whether that's right or wrong. I'm arguing that needs to be communicated with your spouse. You are now one. Mm-hmm. It's one household. It's your finance. It's, combined finances.
Yeah.
Where money is going to then help, family members needs to be agreed upon, mm-hmm. and discussed.
Yeah. We're not arguing,
not to help family members,
or be generous, right? Or,
have
a compassionate heart to help others. It's not it's more along the lines of, if you're talking about really helping someone that's in a dire straits, if that could put your current situation in financial risk, that needs to be agreed upon.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely, baby. What about large purchases? You want to buy
large purchases?
So a spouse wants to buy a car.
Well, since we're on large purchases, hold on. I had a few things I wanted to run by you real quick.
Okay.
I had in mind.
Are we gonna in real time negotiate what we're gonna be spending money on?
Yes, we are. I'm just teasing. Large purchases are. That's a huge thing. For example, this is several years ago, but I wanted to buy a new car, mm-hmm. And I had purchased I had a Tahoe. I paid off, mm-hmm. So I had no car payment, and I really wanted to upgrade my vehicle. We talked about it for a long time. I didn't go out and just, roll up with my new car. Now, I know there's probably situations where that's happened in the marriage, where someone's just shown up with a brand new car, mm-hmm. or they want to purchase a vehicle and it's more about
a want than a need.
Right. Than a need. For me, it was probably maybe a little bit of both. I had some issues with the previous vehicle that were costing me more than the car was worth. But it was also a want. But we talked about it.
Right.
Right?
Right,
okay.
That was a big thing.
That was a big
especially
thing.
For things like that, right? That are going to, how are you going to pay for it? What are you willing to spend? Mm-hmm. I think, so there's some practical things that we were talking about earlier that I think this is more like sales, negotiating is... It's important to recognize that if you're going to buy furniture or a car or any type of big ticket type of expense, those salespeople are trained to leverage one spouse against the other. They're trained to kind of figure out who's the spender, who wants this, who mm-hmm. needs this, who's hard to negotiate with. So a good salesperson is going to try to leverage the spouses against each other to emotionally drive the sale, right?
I'm sure from time to time. But to be clear, I went by myself to buy the Tahoe.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I was kind of, you managed that one. You that guy had no idea what he was in for.
But that was agreed upon. I didn't just roll up in my new car.
Right. So that kind of goes back to what I was saying then, right? Mm-hmm. Is from a takeaway standpoint, we mm-hmm. recommend agreeing on everything you can possibly think of before you leave the house. Right. Yeah. Exactly. Right. What you're going to spend, what your walkaway amount is, who's going to kind of be the final person to say, okay, let's do it. Mm-hmm. Right. Because if a good salesperson can try to emotionally leverage one over the other, mm-hmm. That's how they get a lot of people. Right.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Just go down a little bit of a rabbit hole. Quick question.
Sure.
Do you like to be sold? Do you appreciate a good salesperson?
I'm just curious. I appreciate good. Yes, I do. I don't like to be sold, but I mm-hmm. appreciate real, honest, smart salespeople's
I'm not
efforts.
talking about a slickster because that's not your approach or mine. I'm just saying, do you just appreciate, someone else who's selling you a product,
I do appreciate the process when someone's doing the process well. Mm-hmm. And I'm probably more likely to buy from that person than I appreciate they're doing an honest, mm-hmm. Maybe even if it's a kind of a slick process,
honest salesperson.
Well, I mean, it could be slick and still be honest, right? Not slick. You're saying slicks are like sleazy. No,
a slickster is not somebody who's honest. A slickster is somebody who is. That's the definition of a slickster is someone who is trying to pull a fast one on you.
Right. No, what I mean is someone that's slick, wow, they're maybe or witty is better. Mm-hmm. Knows how to.
Well, they may be strategic. They know the right questions to
people.
ask. To really understand what you want. That's a good salesperson.
Agreed.
and I appreciate that. I appreciate the process, like you mentioned. I appreciate the process, but I just was curious. So
I just think, right. But what you don't want to ever have is someone see cracks in your unity because they'll exploit that.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's why I think if you are already having these conversations and if you're already agreeing on what the bottom line is that you absolutely are willing to spend or walk away from, then there's probably not there's a lesser, opening of a door for that person to see that crack, and
right.
try to,
And then I think when in doubt, if you're not comfortable or one spouse isn't comfortable, you need to express that quietly and then sleep on it, walk away, and then, sleep on it in 24 hours, have a discussion again. Don't let it cause division. Right.
Well, absolutely not.
Don't let it cause division.
Yeah. So I would say evaluate your current financial status,
right?
Calculate the potential monthly or annual increase to your bottom line. These are things that we're going to do before you leave the house, and really decide, is this a need or is this a want?
Yeah, exactly.
And even if let's say it's a want, there's nothing wrong with having a want, but do I need a vacation in Santorini? Yes, I do.
Well, that goes to,
do I need a new weed whacker?
Yes. The answer is yes. The answer is yes. No. But that goes to, I think, what is a really important part when you're maybe kind of, let's say you do have like a blessing or a bonus that was unexpected, right? I think or if you just have the money saved up and you're trying to figure out what you want to spend it on, I think there's some times where you got to really understand maybe why somebody's pushing, why your spouse is pushing for something so kind of assertively, and maybe ask some questions about like what's driving that. And maybe it's a good time to you may want something, they may want something. Maybe it's more valuable for the marriage and your passion and your kind of trust and all things marriage if you just let the spouse have what they want, right? Be selfless there.
I like that.
Right? I didn't say I'm going to do it. I just said everybody else should do it. No, I think, I think
he's strictly talking to husbands.
Right, pretty much. Just let her have it.
Words of wisdom right there.
Right. But I mean, look, there's value there for your marriage too. In just saying, 10 years, like you said, on your deathbed, are you going to remember the things you got or the things that maybe you were able to, that marriage that was built maybe by being selfless in those types of scenarios. But you know what? Everybody to each his own. But I think there's definitely that, Jackie's points there, really important to get on the same page.
Yeah.
Right. And really talk through that, because if you're not on the same page and then it escalates emotionally, now you've created an unnecessary argument that's back to, related on finances, that if you could have agreed upon things at the beginning, it could have avoided the situation, whether you end up buying whatever it is or not. Right. You can still argue and cause division and purchase the thing or not purchase the thing. So don't cause division.
Right. Because I think it would take the joy out of the purchase anyways.
Sure it would.
Yeah. It's not really worth it.
So let's switch gears a little bit and just kind of talk through what I think is also very relevant.
Yeah.
And that's, how do you as a couple, as a married couple, work through financial trouble? Right? Because back to the statistics we talked about, it's like, that's the number one kind of, or, behind infidelity, it's the number one cause of divorce, but it's also that it's the stress and the arguing and everything that then kind of grows out of that.
Yeah.
Right. So this component is one of those things that can really, if you're not careful and you're not, together, can really kind of escalate and build and build and build into, unfortunately, divorce.
Yeah.
Right. And that's this financial trouble. And to be clear, what we're not focused on is when one of the spouses is the cause of the financial trouble, right?
Like the gambling situation. Yeah.
Right. Or, they just won't stop spending and blowing money on whatever else. I mean, if shoes puts you in that big of a hole financially, then that's a problem.
Depends what kind of shoes you're buying.
Well, that would be a problem, right? So what we're more focused on is stuff that's out of your control.
Yeah.
Right.
Like life-altering situations that just happen to you. You're not looking for it to happen.
And you didn't directly cause it because of poor choices or those type of things, right? And so I think that one of the biggest ones would be a job loss, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is really poignant for a lot of people from the pandemic.
A lot of people experience a job loss. I had more conversations in my line of work with people that were without a job last year than I ever have. In all of my years
from a
in my industry,
absolutely.
For the last 10 years, last year, most of my calls were with candidates that had no job.
And it was an odd time too, because there was like what didn't get asked a lot of times is, well, why'd you lose your job? If you just said, the company laid off everybody because of the COVID, right? It was it was understood.
Support. These were high level positions too.
Yeah.
I'm talking VPs. I'm not, sure there were entry level, but there were a lot of people that had been with the same company for 15, 20 years and all of a sudden without a job.
Yeah.
Then what do you do?
So it's a little different scenario, at least with COVID, because it's not, there's almost like a collective understanding around the job loss. It doesn't take away the impact financially though, right?
Yeah, and there's no follow-up question to that. But what it does behind closed doors within a marriage into a family, depending on where their financial status was to begin with, that could be really detrimental to the relationship and potentially their future.
Yeah, and so we want to kind of talk through real life examples as well as what can you guys do if you're experiencing those types of scenarios, and what can help you ensure that you get through it together,
right? And
not something that then
drives a wedge.
Drives a wedge, right? And so we've talked about it before. So last year, my company, as in a lot, they got about 3/4 of the company on a phone call. They said, be on this phone call. And they laid off everybody, just like that, right?
75%. That's significant.
Yeah. And I know that story is repeated across the country, or has been repeated.
Yeah.
And so, from our household to yours, like we have lived through that.
Yeah.
Right. And there were tough times. There were times where it could have divided us if we let it, because it got emotional.
Yeah. How could it not? I mean, there's so many unknowns around that.
But ultimately it didn't. And I think it's important to look back and say, well, what did we do? What did we do that was good, bad? What could we have done different? And so I think, from my perspective as the person that was laid off, I think one of the things that I didn't do a good job of at first, but because of kind of that self-pity and kind of, well, I'm the one that lost the job and so on. It's really, I did learn it, is I think it's important to recognize how much added stress that puts on the other spouse, right? And if you're not careful, it can then double down and kind of accelerate some of that division. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, obviously, because, it's one of those things where, yes, we had always had these conversations on our finances. We're very transparent, but I don't think we ever had a conversation around job loss. Does anybody plan for that? Did anybody plan for last year? No, nobody really plans for that. And then nobody plans for, aside from the financial piece, the emotional piece. What does that do to you? What does that do to me? What does that do to us collectively? So
what does it do to our kids? Like all these things, it spills over, right?
It's like a volcano, and it's like, when you watch like a volcano and the lava is like slowly, that's basically what it's doing. It starts slowly coming out of the volcano until it's covering everything.
There's the initial
recognize,
holy crap.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I need to get this under control, because the emotions, especially in a financial situation, you can't allow the emotional piece to take over. I mean, at that point, you really, and we needed to pick ourselves up by our bootstraps. Obviously I'm not painting over the fact that, yes, it was still a very trying time emotionally for you or for anybody who is experiencing the job loss directly. But if you let that take over, then it's going to spill over into the relationship. And I think the person who then is holding the weight of potentially at that point being the breadwinner could feel like they're holding the financial piece on their shoulders, and then also your emotional
baggage,
yeah,
or not. Well, I wouldn't say baggage, but I would
baggage,
say,
but, just
where
that's a lot to carry.
It's a lot to carry, and so it's important. So back to my point, I think it's really important to be empathetic and to recognize that if there's a negative response that you get from your spouse, like recognize there is tremendous pressure now put on their shoulders. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about not just maybe the financial stress, and this is both directions, husbands, wives, mm-hmm. Pick your direction, right?
Yeah.
It still adds that stress to the other spouse. But it also, what tends to happen mm-hmm. is you direct your own, you kind of project your own sort of self-pity or anger or frustration or fear. You kind of project that on your spouse. And now you've added that, like you just said, like the emotional component, you just added even more stress on their shoulders. So I think it's important to have good communication, to share your feelings without making it seem like you're shooting arrows at the spouse, mm-hmm. right? So you can speak to like your fears and what's bothering you and what has you upset and how you feel, but don't turn that into a blame game.
Yeah. Because
right?
It's not their fault. I mean, obviously I don't think any spouse would want their husband or wife to lose their job, and going through that experience, it's not their fault. There's so many unknowns. And so part of it's also fears. I think that fears that are there on mm-hmm. either side, the person that's now, carrying the financial weight on their shoulders, and then the person who experienced a job loss, there's fear on both ends, which then I think a lot of people react with anger, because mm-hmm. they're scared. It's like a fight or flight kind of situation, right?
Sure.
But recognizing, that's when you really need to come together. Really do need to come together, because you're both feeling that uncertainty, mm-hmm. and the person that had experienced a job loss, I'm sure, that's a huge blow to your ego. Mm-hmm. It's making you feel insecure and kind of question things, or maybe who you are and where you are at that time. Those are all understandable things. So it was a learning experience. We learned a lot.
Well, and it doesn't have to be just a job loss. Let's just say, just tough finance.
Yeah.
There's
so many things that happen in life that are completely out of our control. They're outside of a job loss. Like we talked about earlier, there could be family members that maybe need, let's say somebody needs to move into your home, or you need to take care of a family member that's no longer able to take care mm-hmm. of themselves. These are things that I've seen that happen, where I know somebody that had to stop working so they could take care of a family member. And so now they're going from 2 incomes to 1. Mm-hmm. I've had plenty of people that have had to do that for an elderly parent or a grandparent, and all of a sudden they're without that income. Maybe it's not forever, but it could be for a year. That's not something that's planned,
right?
And there could be resentment there all of a sudden. Wait a second, I was leaning on you for an additional,
especially if the decision was made and it wasn't agreed upon. So, mm-hmm. right, if it still may ultimately,
I have to do.
Right.
I've got to take care of this person. So there's a lot of situations like that where, regardless if it's job loss or, needing to take care of a family, at the end of the day, you do need to kind of check yourself, regroup, come together with your husband and wife, and have these conversations. And
really have a conversation that is honest, and we will get through this together. Mm-hmm. Nothing is allowed. Nothing is going to separate us, period. Yeah. Right? And agree on that emotionally from the front, right from the start, and it'll be helpful mm-hmm. to then frame up those moments, because there's still going to be moments where you're angry, where you're hurting, where you lash out, right?
Yeah.
But if you always just try to, both as the person lashing or the person receiving the lashing, like kind of take a breath and understand where it's coming from, mm-hmm. and then correct, and then apologize if you need to.
Yeah.
So those are the emotional, which is probably most of it. But there's also some tactical things you got to make sure you do, right? And mm-hmm. if there is a financial loss or, a change mm-hmm. in the negative, you really need to sit down and look at the budget and agree on what you need to cut, mm-hmm. right? Like one person just can't go slashing everything and make unilateral decisions. Well, we're not going to spend that anymore. I'm turning this off. We're not doing that. And all of a sudden it overwhelms the other person.
Yeah. Then everything feels like it's spinning out of control. But if you agree together, I think one of the things we had, this is kind of funny. I don't know if you guys do this, but there's so many memberships now. And, you know, I mean, you just sign up for membership here or there. You sign up for
$5 here, $10 a month. Yeah.
Yeah. Like this channel, that channel. Oh, I added, you know, I've got Peacock. I've got, you know,
we have way too
Prime,
many channels.
You know, I had a jewelry membership, you know, magazines or books coming into my Amazon account, whatever. We had to step back and say, okay, what's this membership? Let's eliminate this. I mean, just things that really weren't needs, you know, until we got back to where we normally are. You know, you just have to have those conversations, whether it's that situation or anything else.
Yeah, make it black and white, right?
Instead of one person slashing everything. That's a little jarring.
But I think emotionally, maybe that probably happens a lot.
I'm sure.
You know, they go off and it may be ultimately the right things to slash, but.
And it could be done out of panic, or could it be, it could be a power play.
It could be a power play. Yeah. So you got to be really mindful. That's why I think when I say black and white is put it on paper and go through it together, agree on it, and then, you know, adjust as you need to. But if one person, I think the biggest issue in that scenario is when one person starts unilaterally freaking out, making decisions. Yeah. And the other person's left holding the bag emotionally and not understanding what's going on. And then it's just, create resentment and then boom, escalating to other arguments.
It'll snowball.
It will. I like that term, snowballing into, you don't want things to grow and grow and grow when they could have been headed off right from the beginning. Right? So,
yeah, I agree.
Well Jinx, there you go. Babe.
Yeah.
Why don't you kind of sum us up and send us off today?
Yeah. So I think this was great. I mean, there's a lot of really great takeaways, and you know, we would encourage you guys to, you know, wherever you are now, if you even haven't experienced these things, you know, just to start communicating regarding your current financial situation and where you want to be. I think summer's also a really big time where people like to spend. I know that's kind of my time where I like to spend, but on vacation. So I'm still trying to push Tommy towards that trip to Santorini. I'm putting it out there. But
You've put it out there many times, my love. We will at some point.
But we appreciate you guys listening. Again, and be sure to share the podcast with anyone you know that might be able to take some really good pearls from this podcast. We'll be back next week. Love you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode, and if so, please continue to listen and subscribe on Podbean, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. We would greatly appreciate positive reviews, and we will answer any questions at feedback@destinationmarriagepodcast.com. For up-to-date content and news about the podcast, you can follow us on Instagram at destination_marriage and visit our website at destinationmarriagepodcast.com. Be sure to tune in next week.